Hello everybody, Austin to Mars here. I know it's not Mars Monday, but I've been promising to tell you guys a little bit about who I am in these videos, and so far I haven't really told you about my past. So I would like to do this special edition for you guys to tell you about a part of my past that I think is important for you to know about. Well, if you've read my website or my Reddit Ask Me Anything or listened to interviews, you know that I was in the Army for 4 years, that I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, and that I served in Afghanistan. Today, that's what I want to tell you about. I want to try to show you how I believe my experiences in Afghanistan could potentially benefit the Mars One mission should I be selected as an astronaut. So today I want to tell you about three specific parts of my experience. My separation from my wife, the harsh environment in Afghanistan, and the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week work schedule. And hopefully you'll see how those experiences can apply to the Mars One mission. Like many stories about the military, this one begins on September 11, 2001. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, and I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I remember when the second airplane hit the World Trade Center. The base commander locked the base down tight, nobody could get on or off, and our own unit commander started preparing us for deployment. The 82nd is a quick reaction deployment force, so we didn't know if we were going to be going in a couple weeks or if we weren't even going on the first rotation. Nobody knew. But we were preparing for deployment anyway. As it turned out, Task Force Rakkasan from the 101st Airborne Division went on the first rotation. They left in October of 2001, and we continued to prepare for deployment because we expected that we would be on the second rotation. Melissa and I got married in October of 2001, and she submitted for approval to move from Fort Gordon to Fort Bragg. It's a very lengthy approval process, so it took about 4 or 5 months to get approved. After she was finally approved, she moved up to Fort Bragg, and that was in about June of 2002. About the same time, I received word from my unit that we would be deploying overseas in July or so. And this is a picture of my unit before we deployed, and I'm holding the guidon flag. I was the guidon bearer for our company. So soon after this picture was taken, I had to say goodbye with my wife and go overseas for an indeterminate period of time. We expected it to be about 6 or 8 months, but it could have been longer or shorter. We didn't know. So I said goodbye, and I rode on a truck down to the airport, and we got on military airplanes, and we flew to Afghanistan. The trip to Kandahar took about 7 days from the time we left the United States till the time we landed in Kandahar. Of course, we weren't flying the whole time. We landed at one place in the US, and then we boarded a C-5, which is a really huge airplane. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but the nose of the airplane opens up, and they put tanks and helicopters and all kinds of cargo in there. So our cargo was in there, and we flew right on top of the cargo space. There's some seats in the top, and they face backwards of all things. But it was a really interesting experience to fly on such a big airplane. It was like a football field inside. It was so big. But we landed in Germany, and we stayed there for a couple days waiting for our cargo, the rest of our cargo, and waiting for an airplane to get us to Kandahar. We departed Germany on a C-130, and I don't know if you've ever heard of a C-130, but it's kind of a small cargo plane. It has 4 propellers, and it flies very slowly because it's a propeller airplane. It took us about 9 hours or something to fly to Kandahar. It took forever. It felt like forever. And it was a really uncomfortable flight because you're sitting in these, they call them cargo seats, but basically all they are canvas strapped between 2 metal poles or bars with a metal pole at the end, and so that's where your legs hang over and your legs fall asleep, and you got metal jamming you in the back. It's just a really uncomfortable flight for 9 hours. Anybody that's flown on a C-130, I know that you know what I'm talking about. Well, on this flight, I was just a lower enlisted soldier. I was maybe 20 or 21 years old, so I didn't know what to expect. No, I think I was like 20 years old. I didn't know what to expect when I landed there. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, I wonder if it's going to be enemies everywhere. Is there going to be snipers on the hill trying to shoot us as we're walking off the airplane? And I don't think that I was the only one that was thinking this stuff. There were other lower enlisted there with me, and I think they were probably thinking the same thing. And even some of the junior NCOs who had never been on a deployment, I think they were probably thinking the same thing too. It didn't help the situation when the flight crew said, when you guys land, you have to put on your body armor and you have to put on your Kevlar helmet, and that's just for safety to protect you. So then that made my thoughts go even crazier. But the reality was that after our airplane landed, on the outside of the airplane, there was nothing out there but dust and heat. They dropped the tailgate of the airplane and we walked off, and literally it was like walking into an oven. If you open the oven in your house and you feel that heat come out, that's what it was like walking into. It was 130 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but 130 degrees on that flight line on the tarmac. And you could see the heat shimmer lines out on the asphalt. So it was really, really hot. As we were walking off of the flight line, I saw some Task Force Rakkasan guys, the 101st guys, who were finishing up their deployment and they were getting ready to go home. They were just waiting for flights. And I saw their bags, and their bags were just like really covered in dust. They were brown with dust. They were black bags or green bags, but they had turned brown from being in Afghanistan. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, why don't those soldiers just make an effort and clean those bags? Well, later I would realize how futile that thought is, because I would go home with dirty bags, because that's dust that you just can't clean out of the equipment. You can't get it out, and it gets in everything. Your uniforms, your bags, your computers, your vehicles, it gets in everything. So I went home with dirty stuff too. Having landed in Kandahar, our first order of business, of course, was to set up the place where we were going to sleep. It was a new tent that hadn't been set up yet. Fortunately, I was on day shift while I was during my deployment, so I had to go to work to do a turnover with the people that were departing. The people that were on night shift had to go outside in the hot sun and the dust and set up the tent, so I did not envy them. But they got the tent set up, and after I was finished doing my turnover at work, I walked back to my tent, and it was really amazing. And I'll show you these pictures right here to show you what I'm talking about. But the dust there is so unique to me. Growing up in the United States, I hadn't seen dust like that. It was piles of dust, maybe 6 or 8 inches deep, and the consistency of it is very similar to baby powder or talcum powder or something like that. You smash it like this and it makes a big poof of dust. I don't even think that it's real dirt. It's just dust that settled down on the ground. And so in these pictures, I have one that is me just putting my foot down, not even stamping, just setting my foot down in the dust. And the second picture is the dust cloud that happens because of me putting my foot down. So this stuff is everywhere, and it gets in everything. You can see why it gets in everything. To me, this dust, I don't know if it's exactly the same as what we're going to see on Mars, but I've seen pictures of the rovers, you know, they leave a little trail in the dirt. And I think that the dust in Afghanistan will be similar to Mars, much more so than what I've seen in the United States, at least. So I have experience dealing with that kind of dust, and I know what happens when it gets into the equipment, and I know what happens when it gets into your personal stuff. So I think that I can take my experience from Afghanistan and apply it to helping make the Mars 1 mission more successful. So after I trudged through all that dust to get to our tent, which was pretty far from work, I walked into our tent and I saw where I would be sleeping for the next 6 or 8 months. It was a shared 24-man tent. I don't know the dimensions, but it wasn't very big for 24 men. And we had cots to sleep on, That was it. There was nothing else in there. We had a wood floor at least because it would help prevent insects, but that was all that was in there, just cots. So about all of the personal space that each person had was maybe 24 square feet or something like that, 6 feet by 4 feet. And most of that was taken up by your cot. You would have your cot and you would have a little bit of walking space next to your cot. And most of your stuff went under the cot. Like I had a box where I put my clothes and things like that. And I'll show you this picture right here. Sorry I drew all of it, all over it. This was something that I did in Afghanistan and sent back to my wife and my family to show them where I lived. My grammar on there is terrible, my spelling is terrible because I was really tired, or I don't know why, but I apologize for that. But you get an idea of what the living space was like. Very, very cramped. You can see my bug net there. We had to do that because of the mosquitoes that had malaria. To me, living in that small tent with all those other guys and their different habits and things that they do at night, walk around, make noise, cough, whatever. Plus, we were men and we were overseas, and so the tent didn't smell great. There was just a lot of things that you're not used to when you're living in a normal home. But living in that smaller area, I think, helps me be better prepared for living in the small capsule that the Martian astronauts are going to be living in as they journey from Earth to Mars. And also when they get to Mars, they're going to be living in a small habitat too, not much room to spread out. So I think that this experience in the tent helps me be a little bit better prepared for what I could experience on the Mars mission if I was selected as a candidate. Going back to what I started earlier about my separation with my wife, which is the first experience from Afghanistan that I think I could apply to the Mars 1 mission. Going back to that, as my deployment was winding down in Afghanistan, I received word from my wife that her unit was going overseas soon after I arrived home. So what my unit commander did was allow me to go home about a week early. I arrived home, and luckily she found out that her unit was going to send her to Tampa, Florida, instead of to overseas where the rest of her unit was going. I think that was probably because we had been separated already. But it was good for us that she wasn't going overseas. But then again, we were only going to live together for about a week, and she was going to go to Tampa, Florida, and we were going to be separated again. So I think that that separation, which continued after we got out of the military, we went on deployments after that for many years. To this day, still, she's going on deployments. And during those deployments, sometimes we would be together and sometimes we would be separated. We've spent at least 3 periods of time where we were separated for 6 months without seeing each other. I know that saying goodbye, a permanent goodbye, how it's going to be for Mars 1, saying goodbye in that aspect is not quite the same as saying goodbye to a spouse who's going overseas for 6 months. But in a lot of ways, it's very similar, because try and tell anybody who's experienced the deployment side, the soldier or the soldier spouse or me or my wife, try and tell them that when they say goodbye, that it's not forever, because you don't know. So you try to enjoy that goodbye and those last moments of hugging and things like that as if it was going to be forever. That's just the way the deployments work, because you don't know if you're going to come home. So I think that my experience saying goodbye to my wife so many times and us being apart so many times has conditioned me to be prepared for the possibility that if I am selected, that I will have to say goodbye to her permanently. So that's the story of my first deployment in Afghanistan. I hope that I was able to show you guys how the three parts of my experience that I highlighted, the separation from my wife, the environment in Afghanistan, and the rigorous work schedule, how those 3 parts of my experience could apply to benefiting the Mars 1 mission should I be selected as an astronaut. If you guys have any comments, please leave them in the YouTube comment section. And I hope to continue to do videos like this to show you guys who I am, about my past, and hopefully convince you that I'm a good candidate to be a Mars 1 astronaut. And I will talk to you guys next time. All right? See ya.